Hey everyone, we are back this week on the What Do They Know podcast. Nick is flying solo today, and he will break down some of the top headlines that we missed over the last few weeks and from week 12. He will give you his updated power rankings and go over some of the key matchups to keep an eye on for the next few weeks. But hey, what do they know?
What do they know? Well, we are about to find out. What's going on, everybody? We are finally back. This is the What Do They Know podcast. My name is Nick Hoskins. For those of you watching, you can see that I am solo this week. Jeff Garcia is on the injury report for this week. He is battling a head cold and just couldn't make it work. So we wanted to at least get something out there for you guys. It's been a heck of a 2 weeks. We apologize for not having any content the last 2 weeks. Obviously, one of them was planned with me being in Vegas for the weekend with my dad. Went to the Jets and Raiders game. That was a blast. But last Sunday was not planned. I had, my whole household was sick, and I just, Sunday happened to be my worst day where I just couldn't make it work for you guys. So I apologize. Me and Jeff had made plans to do a separate episode during this week to hopefully make up for that. And then, Jeff came down with the cold on Friday and wasn't able to go, and, couldn't make it work again today. So I wanted to at least get something in front of you guys. So Jeff gave me the go ahead to just kind of roll solo this week. So we'll see how this goes. So bear with me. So we have a lot of stuff to catch up on, right? We obviously being gone for 2 weeks. There's a lot of stuff that happened. First and foremost, just the QB injuries that have happened specifically in the AFC North. Obviously, in the last 2 weeks, we lost Joe Burrow from the Bengals and Deshaun Watson from the Browns, both season-ending injuries. And both of those are huge, right? Because the Browns currently, the Browns currently are in the playoffs. They sit at the 6th seed at 7-4. The Bengals were on a hot streak. They had just knocked off the Bills. They had won, 3 or 4 in a row. And then the injury to Joe Burrow happened, and obviously they lost again today. So they're sitting at, I believe, 5-6. So their season, took a massive turn in a matter of one play, whereas the Browns have still been able to kind of keep it alive. They're playing quarterback carousel. Today they had to go to their third string guy due to their starter getting a concussion, so they ended up losing today to the Broncos. But those two teams, I mean, at one point we were talking about the AFC North being the best division in football, and possibly all 4 teams making it in to the playoffs, which hasn't happened in a very long time. I don't know that it's ever happened, but that was the headline not only 3 weeks ago, right? So a lot has changed in a matter of 2 weeks, and injuries. You hate when injuries impact decisions and impact standings, but specifically with football, it's just the way that it is. It's just part of the game. So those are 2 huge storylines that we've missed the last couple weeks. One of the top stories that I wrote that I really wanted to talk about is the Denver Broncos. They have had, the best turnaround in all of football. I mean, if you think about their season, they started out 1-5, right? They have since won 5 in a row. They beat Green Bay, they beat Kansas City, they beat Buffalo, they beat the Vikings, they beat the Browns. So think about 4 of those 5 teams could be playoff teams. Kansas City, the Vikings, and the Browns currently are in the playoffs. Buffalo, you could make an argument that they might end up in the playoffs as well. So it's not like they're beating, run of the mill, the Patriots or the Panthers or last place teams. They're beating contenders, and they look like a contender. Their defense has flipped the switch when you think about the fact that they gave up 70 points to the Dolphins in week 3. Their defense has played lights out. They basically manhandled the Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes. They made Josh Allen look really bad on Monday Night Football. They made, the Josh Dobbs, who everybody loves right now from Minnesota, they made him look, average finally. And then today, I watched bits and pieces of that game because I had it on the multi-view for the late games. And they made the Browns look pedestrian. I think they only gave up 12 points to the Browns today. So their defense, I don't know what they did to figure it out. But they figured it out in a big way. And Russell Wilson and Sean Payton have figured it out as well. Because you think about the criticism that they were getting at the beginning part of the season. People were saying that Russell Wilson, this contract, this massive trade, this massive contract could go down as the worst contract given in the history of the NFL. and they have completely turned it around. Russell Wilson looks great. Their offense has flow. He's scrambling again. He's making off schedule plays like he did with Seattle. What made him so great? I think about the throw that he made to Cortland Sutton on Monday Night Football against the Bills. He made a great throw today, front right pylon to their tight end Troutman, I think his name was. Great throw, scrambling on the run for a touchdown. So he's doing those Russell Wilson type things that we didn't see last year and we didn't see in the first 6 weeks. And we're starting to see it now. So they're a phenomenal story. Nobody can say that they saw this turnaround coming midway through the season when they were 1-5, and they're right there. They're in the thick of it. And I mean, with the teams that they've already beaten, you can't really say that there's any team when you look at the remaining schedule that you can automatically chalk up as a loss. I say that, they're pretty much going to be competitive if they keep playing like this in every game and every week. So I think they're a really, really good story. The AFC wildcard picture is really, really getting interesting. And it's kind of for the things that I already talked about, right? We talked about the Bengals. They fell out of it. I don't really expect them to do much with Jake Browning. They lost today. They went to 5-6. Denver's coming up out of nowhere. You think about the wild card picture right now. So currently we have Pittsburgh at 7-4. Don't even get me started on them. I'll talk about them in a minute. Browns at 7-4, who we already talked about. Indianapolis at 6-5. I mean, good for them. Good for Shane Steichen. They lost their starting quarterback week 3 or week 4, and they weren't expected to do anything anyways this season. But they're sitting at 6-5 in that last wild card spot. And then those teams that you have, in the hunt, Houston at 6-5, they're a phenomenal story. Denver, who we already talked about, and Buffalo at 6-6. So there is a lot left to be decided, right? I mean, it's week 12. We have 6 more weeks left of football, and anything could happen. I think that I talked about Pittsburgh. They're 7-4, and that is just mind blowing to me. When you think about the fact that they have been outgained in total yards every single week this season, and they're 7-4. They've won 7 of those games in which they've been outgained in total yardage. That is just a credit to coaching and a credit to their defense. I mean, Jeff and I have talked at length about what we think about Mike Tomlin. And I mean, he's on full display this season with what he's been able to do. Obviously, they made the change this past week. They fired their offensive coordinator, Matt Canada. Excuse me. Can't really say that it made a huge impact this week. They didn't light the world on fire. They got the W. But again, they were playing the Bengals and their backup quarterback. And I think that was a game where their defense just pretty much dominated. So, and that's what it's been like all season. They're not flashy. They don't make these huge chunk yardage plays, put up a ton of yards. Their offense is very pedestrian, and I don't know that it's sustainable. Obviously, it's been sustainable for 2/3 of the season so far. So who's to say that it can't continue? But at some point, that stat that I threw out at the beginning where, they're being outgained in every single game, I feel like that's going to come into play at some point this season. So they're a very interesting one. The Browns at 7-4, their defense, again, it's the same story as Pittsburgh, right? Their defense is phenomenal. They have arguably the best defense in the league, and they've gone through 3 different quarterbacks so far this season. So, I mean, they've shown that they can win with just about anybody at quarterback. Now, is it sustainable? Again, it's the same question as the Steelers. I don't know yet that it's sustainable. They lost to the Broncos today, and their offense did not look good. So we'll see what happens there. And then Indianapolis, I mean, you talk about the value of a good backup quarterback. I mean, as a Jet fan, I could sit here and talk about this for hours and hours and hours. You think about, I saw somebody tweeted today that Gardner Minshew, the backup, who is now the starter for the Colts due to injury, he signed a $3.5 million deal in the offseason to be the Colts backup quarterback. That's like nothing when it comes to quarterback money. So you think about how many teams could have really, really used him this year. The Jets, right? The Browns, the Bengals, the Colts did it. I mean, so good for them. Obviously, he was familiar with Shane Steichen, them both coming from Philadelphia. So it kind of was a natural fit, I think, for both of them. But now that signing is proving to be gigantic. Because I mean, granted, he's not turning into Joe Montana, but he's doing what he needs to do to help his team win games. And so, they're 6-5. They have that last wild card spot as of now, and so we'll see what happens. But you talk about those teams that are in the hunt. Houston at 6-5. I think that they will eventually get one of those 3 spots. I've watched a good amount of their games the past 3 or 4 weeks, and I love everything about Houston. I love CJ Stroud. I love their coach. I love their weapons. Tank Dell, partially because he's on one of my fantasy teams and he's helping me just big time the last couple weeks. They have a really, really dynamic passing game, and they can do enough in the run game as well. They got Devin Singletary this past year from Buffalo, who I was always a huge fan of. I watched a lot of him when he was in Buffalo, and I always felt like he's one of those prototypical guys that just a gritty guy. He never goes down on the first tackle, always gets extra yardage, and Buffalo just never really used him to his fullest potential. And he's turned up huge because Damian Pierce has been out since the middle of October. And so they have a phenomenal passing game. Nico Collins, Tank Dell, Robert Woods, and they can do it in the run game as well. And CJ Stroud, you would never know that he's a rookie. He's playing just out of his mind right now. So if I was a betting man right now, I would say that Houston will overtake probably the Browns or maybe even Indy. I don't know. I think that Houston will fit into one of those wild card spots, if not win the division. The division is not out of hand. Obviously, they had a huge chance today. They were playing Jacksonville, who was one game ahead of them, and Jacksonville was able to get the W. So now they have that deficit facing them. So we'll see if they're able to do that. It's not out of reach, but I think at minimum they're going to end up as a wild card team. And what a great story. What a great story for them. I mean, I think their over-under on total wins this year was like 3.5. So nobody, Vegas, all the casinos, all the bettors, nobody had any expectations for them this year. And so I think that them doing what they're doing is already an awesome, awesome story. And I'm excited to see where they go. I think the big one that, we could talk about and everyone is really curious to see what happens is Buffalo, right? Excuse me. They're 6-6. They lost a heartbreaker today to Philadelphia. Their offense the last 2 weeks kind of looks like they're starting to figure it out. Obviously, they fired Ken Dorsey after the Monday night loss to Denver. Their offense was great against the Jets last week. And the Jets have a good defense, so that's nothing to shrug your shoulders about or say, oh, it's just the Jets. The Jets have a great defense, and they made their defense look not good at all. And then they put up 34 points today against Philadelphia, who also has a very, very good defense. So I think their offense is starting to figure it out. I would argue that they should have won that game today. Philadelphia did not play well. Didn't really look like they were playing with much emotion. Jalen Hurts at one point was sitting on the sideline looking like his dog died. And they were able to, credit to them, they were able to squeak it out when they were not playing their best at all. But I think Buffalo definitely deserved to win that game. So they're sitting at 6-6. They have their bye week, and then I'll pull up their remaining schedule. I know we've talked about it on this show before. I just want to make sure that I'm getting it accurate. Excuse me, I apologize. As you can tell, I'm still battling the elements, coming off of a cold, actually coming off of RSV. Our whole family, our kids got it. My wife got it real bad. And then I got the last of it, but we're powering through. So after their bye week, they got the Chiefs, which obviously that's a tough game in Kansas City. Then they're home with the Cowboys, another very tough game. And then they're at the Chargers, so they got to go to the West Coast. The Chargers are probably the best 4-win team in the NFL, I would say, right? They have an offense that can score with anybody. And then they have the Patriots at home. Hopefully, that you can say that should be a win, but they've already lost to the Patriots this year, so we'll see what happens there. And then they finish the season at Miami. So currently, they are 2.5 games behind Miami for the division. Obviously, they're right there with the wild card. They're a half game back. I think that Buffalo is a team that can't, obviously has the potential, has the firepower to get back in there, but their schedule is no easy thing. If they play like they did today, they will win. They will win their fair share of games. How many left is that? That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I would say they win 3 or 4 of those games, which that'll put them at 9 or 10 wins, and that's going to be right on the cusp of getting in or not. So we'll see what happens with Buffalo. They're a really intriguing story, but you think about the teams that currently are not in and don't look like they're going to be in. Obviously, Cincinnati we talked about, the Chargers we talked about. So there's a lot going on in the AFC, and I'm really, really curious to see kind of how it plays out. So I have an overreaction for you guys. I have one overreaction, courtesy of our co-host Jeff Garcia, who's obviously not here with us today. But he when we were talking today, and I told him I was going to throw something together for you guys, and not sure how long it was going to be, but he wanted to throw out an overreaction, and I'll read. I don't even know if he thought this was an overreaction, honestly. I'll read to you what he said. As for some quick thoughts, both of our teams will enter next year with new coaching staffs. So you think about, obviously he's a Saints fan and I'm a Jets fan. I have been on the Robert Saleh train for a really long time. I think he's a great coach. He's not the reason that they're losing. Now, having said that, this past week, the Black Friday game against the Dolphins was the first game where I really started to get fed up and started to wonder if he needed to go. And the reason I say that is just the stupid penalties and mistakes that they make week after week. Now, I had this conversation with my dad when we were in Vegas, just kind of talking about the Jets and how they look and what their problems are. And I said, people always say that penalties are on the coaching staff. And I've never really been one to understand that or subscribe to that. Like, at the end of the day, the players are making those decisions. The players are jumping off sides. The players are having a false start. They're holding. They're grabbing a face mask, whatever it is, right? How can you hold the coaches accountable to that? I've never really been able to wrap my mind around that or really get on board with that thought. But at some point, you have to do something as a coach, right? If your team is continuously making bad decisions and killer mistakes that put you in a position where you just can't score points, which is exactly what the Jets do, it has to fall on the coaches at some point, right? You think about, I can think of 3 or 4 plays in each of their last several games where they had something going, they had momentum, they had a good offensive drive, and something stupid happened, whether it was a penalty, a drop, false start, holding, whatever, a drop ball, like I already said, that basically ended the drive, ended any momentum that they had, and they either settled for no points or they settled for a field goal. They have scored 10 offensive touchdowns in their first 11 games, which I'm pretty sure is historically bad, not in a good way. And so I say all that to say that while I've never been one to really blame penalties on the coaches, at some point you have to be held accountable for not holding your players accountable, if that makes sense. You can't just sit there and let these things continue to happen and not, blame it on the players. Like it has to fall on you. You're the one that sets the tone for your players in your locker room and the standards that your team plays by. And the Jets, it's just gone on too long and too far. Now, those of you who know me really well, I will watch every single minute of every single Jet game. I don't care if they're getting blown out 40-0. I will watch till the clock hits 0, just because I like to dissect games. I love to watch football. I watch every minute, especially when it's my team. And I turned off the Dolphins game, the Black Friday game, with probably about 11 minutes to go in the fourth quarter. I was seething mad, and I was just so frustrated because, again, I felt like the defense played well enough in the first half. They picked off Tua twice, and obviously they had that stupid Hail Mary, which I had no problem with that play call. I know a lot of the players said they were surprised that they called it. You need points. Like you got to try anything at this point. Now, the fact that they ran it back, yeah, that's a really terrible look. And of course, it's a very Jet thing to have happen. But I have no problem with them going for the Hail Mary in that situation. But they had a ton of momentum right there. They had picked off Tua twice in like his last 3 throws. One of them was a pick six. And that game was there. That game was 10-6. So who knows what would have happened in the second half. But as the game started to get out of reach, the Jets kind of kept making more and more mistakes. And in the fourth quarter, the game was out of reach. It was 27-6 at this point or something like that. And they had like a 4th and 2 at the 50-yard line, and they're getting ready to go for it because why not? And they had a false start, and it made it 4th and 7. And I don't even know if they ended up going for it again. I don't know if they punted. I don't know what they did. I was so frustrated that they just can't even hike the ball without jumping off sides when they're getting blown out. 4th and 2. Now you went from a 4th and 2 to a 4th and 7. I was, and it's, it's something little, but when it continues to build and build and build, I got so frustrated I turned off the game. And I never do that. I cannot remember the last time I turned off a game early. I couldn't tell you. I watch every single minute of every single game. And so I was seething mad. I was tense, and I just needed to turn it off. And I don't know. Again, I don't know if they ended up going for it still or if they punted. Doesn't really matter, right? They ended up losing. I think it was like 36-13 or something like that. Got blown out again. But so I say all this to say I'm starting to, and we'll see how the remaining 6 weeks go. If Rodgers comes back, what the offense looks like, if Rodgers comes back, all that good stuff. But this week was the first week where I really started to get on board with maybe the Jets need to make a bigger change than I thought. Maybe it's because I think Nathaniel Hackett needs to go. And I think that the only reason I told my dad this 2 weeks ago, that the only reason he hasn't been fired yet is because he's Aaron Rodgers' guy. Any other team with this offensive performance, they would have fired their offensive coordinator a long time ago. And I think that he still has a job because of Aaron Rodgers. So I think he's gone in the offseason anyways, at least I hope. But I'm starting to kind of get on board with maybe the fact that Robert Saleh needs to go too. I'm not... You very easily can convince me otherwise. I'm not sold on that yet. But this was the first week where I really thought about it and considered that maybe they need to make a change. So we'll see what happens with the Jets. As far as the Saints, I did not watch their game this week. Obviously, they had a big divisional matchup with the Falcons, which they lost. Now both of those teams are 5-6, but Atlanta is in the division lead, obviously via the tiebreaker against the Saints. So I didn't watch that game. I couldn't. I don't have very much breakdown for you. All I can tell you is what I have seen and what I know as far as who's on their roster and talent and all that. And in my opinion, there's zero reason that this team should be 5-6. They have way too many offensive weapons. And I think a big indictment on Derek Carr. I was a big Derek Carr fan. I am a big Derek Carr fan. Excuse me. Me and Jeff were both really excited when the Saints signed him. But a big indictment on him is when he went out 2 weeks ago against the Vikings. So I was actually in Vegas. I watched that game. My dad and I watched games all day at the sports book at the hotel we were staying at. It was glorious. But when he went out of that game with the concussion and with the shoulder issue, and Jameis Winston came in, they were throwing it all over the field. They got Chris Olave involved. Kamara obviously did his thing. Michael Thomas, and they marched right down the field and scored 2 or 3 times and actually made it a competitive game. And so when you look at that, obviously Jameis, he did what he does, and he threw at least 2 picks. So there's always that with him. But I thought it was really surprising to me how the offense looked when Jameis came in versus how it's looked for 10, 11 weeks with Derek Carr. And so that's surprising. And I think that's coaching. That's gotta be coaching. They're not getting there's some disconnect between Carr and the coaching staff. And I talked about it on this show in the past, how when I watch Saints games, he's always yelling at the sideline. He's always yelling at somebody. So he just doesn't look like he's happy for one reason or another, whether it's obviously performance, the scheme. I don't know if he doesn't like the offensive play calling, what the situation is, but Carr just looks like he is just not on board with what they have going on offensively in New Orleans, and it's showing with their performance. They should be putting up way more points than what they scored 12 or 15 points today, all field goals. They didn't score one offensive touchdown. And so I think that I think Jeff could be 100% correct with the Saints that their coaching staff, they're going to get a big revamp. It wouldn't surprise me if their whole staff is gone. I really haven't seen a lot from Dennis Allen, their head coach, to really like or dislike or say, yeah, he's awesome, or no, he's a chump. I haven't really seen that. But I think just based on the fact that they are massively underperforming this year, and at the end of the day, they could still win the division. They're tied for first. Obviously, they Atlanta has it via the tiebreaker, but they very, very easily could still win this division. So we'll see what happens the next 6 weeks. But if it continues down this path, I think that that Dennis Allen and the rest of their coaches are definitely going to be relocating somewhere. So we'll see what happens there. But I thought that was a really, really interesting take from Jeff. And it's not that far off on either of them, the Jets or the Saints. You could very easily convince me that both of those coaching staffs will be gone. And I don't think that would sound crazy at all. So I thought that was a good one from him. I will give you guys, obviously Jeff's not here to pick it apart or tell me that I'm crazy, but I'm going to give you guys my power rankings. Obviously there's been a lot that's happened over the last few weeks. A lot of teams have kind of shown up. A lot of teams have kind of digressed. So at number one, I had the 49ers back on top. They've showed the last 2 weeks. They obviously they just manhandled Seattle on Thanksgiving. And then the week prior, while I was in Vegas, I watched them just completely annihilate Jacksonville. Both of those are playoff teams. Jacksonville is a division leader right now, the AFC South, and neither of them were competitive at all. The Niners look like they are back to being that 5-0 team before they went on that 3-game losing skid. Obviously, the trade deadline, they did it last year with getting Christian McCaffrey. They did it again this year with trading for Chase Young. Now you got Nick Bosa on one side of the defensive line, and now you have Chase Young, who they played together. They were college teammates at Ohio State, so they have that cohesion and that chemistry. And a move like that, it just naturally creates energy. It creates a spark for a team, and it has showed the last 2 weeks. So I think that the Niners are right back to where they were, being that number one team in the NFL and in the NFC. I had the Eagles at 2. Obviously, they're 10-1. They're the only one-loss team in the NFL, so it's hard not to put them at 1. But this is the same conversation that I was having on this show with Jeff for the first several weeks of the season, and that being that they just don't look right. And I know it's ridiculous to say that of a 10-1 team, but today I've already talked about it. I don't think they deserve to win that game today. They didn't look like a 10-1 team today. They did what they did, right? Good teams find a way to win, and at the end of the day, good credit to them. But when you talk about comparing them to these other 4 teams, or specifically, I guess, the Niners, I think the Niners are going to beat them, and next week will be a perfect time to tell that because they play each other. So I have the Eagles behind the Niners right now, and obviously that could very easily change after next week. Detroit, I have Detroit number 3. I know they lost to Green Bay this week, but I really like what Detroit is doing. You're always going to have those clunkers. Obviously, you'd like not to have it on Thanksgiving. You'd like not to have it after a couple big wins like they've had, but it's happened nonetheless. I'm not really worried about them. I still think they're going to be fine. I still think they're top 2-3 team in the NFL, and so I really like what Detroit's doing. They have a ton of weapons. Their offense has good flow. Obviously, Goff did not have his best game, but I expect them to bounce back. So I have them at number 3. I have the Chiefs at number 4. They beat the Raiders today. They're sitting at 8-3, top, in the AFC. I think that the Chiefs are what the Chiefs are, right? They lost to the Eagles last week in comeback fashion. Excuse me, I apologize. But I think that they are going to be the Chiefs are the 4th best team in the NFL. I'm really, really curious to see, not next week, but the week after, how they look against Buffalo, because it seems like those two teams, they bring out the best in each other. And so I feel like that will be a good tell on what those two teams are. And so we'll see what happens there. 5, I have Baltimore. They're playing right now as they just scored as we speak. They are up 7-3 against the Chargers, or 6-3, extra point pending. So the Baltimore, I know they had that game 2 weeks ago against Cleveland, where they had that huge lead, and Cleveland kind of crawled back and ended up winning that game in kind of miraculous fashion. That was a game that Deshaun Watson ended up getting injured, but he gutted it out. He played the whole game, but they ended up losing him for the season. So tough win there for Cleveland. But besides that, I mean, Baltimore has looked just completely dominant, and so I have them, as number 5 right now. And so for me personally, I think it's really interesting that 3 out of my top 5, actually my top 3 teams, are all in the NFC. When you talk about the storylines at the beginning of the season, everything was, AFC, AFC, AFC. It's so loaded. And for me personally, my 3 best teams are in the NFC. So I think that that's really, really interesting. And we'll see what happens the rest of the way. This is, Thanksgiving is where it really gets good, right? This is where every game matters. Every game matters in the NFL. You only get 17 of them, but after Thanksgiving, it's really these games are crucial. So I'm excited. I'm excited to see what happens the rest of the way. I'm not going to do studs and duds for you guys this week. I'm gonna wait for Jeff to come back and kind of help me out with that. But I just wanted to highlight some big games for next week. Number 1, I already talked about it. San Francisco at Philadelphia. NFC Championship rematch last year. Obviously, Brock Purdy, he tore out his elbow, and the Eagles won that game very easily because they had no quarterback to throw the ball. That they being San Francisco. So I'm really curious to see that rematch. Obviously, I already talked about the fact that I think the Niners will win that game if the two teams play like they did this week, the Niners and the Eagles. I think the Niners will win that game. So I'm really curious about that. The Thursday night game is going to kick the week off great. We got Seahawks at Dallas. Both of them played on Thanksgiving, so it's not a short week, which I like that they do that. They give these teams a full week of preparation still. Obviously, you're playing Thursday to Thursday, so you don't have that short week like you normally do on a Thursday. But Seahawks at Dallas, that could be a really important game, specifically for Seattle, because it's starting to look like they are not going to win the division. Obviously, they got manhandled by San Francisco on Thanksgiving night. So it's kind of starting to seem like, San Francisco separating themselves. And when you talk about wild card, the Seahawks are right there at 6-5, and right above them is Dallas at 8-3. So it's a 2-game lead. But I mean, you beat Dallas in Dallas. Now it's only 1 game, and you have that tiebreaker that could come down being really, really important in the last couple of weeks for seeding and tiebreakers and things of that nature. So that'll be a good Thursday night game. And then another one, which you would have never convinced me at the beginning of the year that this was going to be an important game or a potentially good game, and that's Broncos at Texans. And again, for the same reason that I just talked about with the Cowboys and the Seahawks, and that's for wild card seeding. Obviously, neither of those teams are in right now, but both of them, they're both tied for the last spot at 6-5. And so that's going to be huge for seeding, for tiebreakers, all that good stuff. So that game, I think, could be really, really interesting. And it's kind of strength versus strength, right? The Broncos defense has been so dominant in their 5-game winning streak, and the Texans have such a dynamic offense that I'm really curious to see what happens the rest of the way, or specifically in that game next week. So just wanted to highlight a couple good games for you guys this week. There aren't a ton, if I'm being totally honest, there aren't a ton of good matchups besides those 3. Kansas City at Green Bay, I think, is the Sunday night game. Obviously, we'll see what Green Bay does. They're interesting. They had a huge win in Detroit on Thanksgiving. Jordan Love is starting to figure it out. Obviously, they beat the Chargers 2 weeks ago. They beat the Lions. Excuse me, I really apologize. And so we'll see what happens. So I guess that Sunday night game could end up being interesting with the Chiefs at Green Bay. See if Green Bay can continue that hot streak. So a couple good games for you guys to next week, and we'll get back to normal hopefully next week. All things, knock on wood, obviously we'll get a full show for you guys. Obviously Jeff will be back with me. Hopefully I won't be coughing my brains out. I apologize for that. I'm still, obviously, as you can hear, recovering from the RSV. But we are all healthy, so thank you for that. We're very thankful. But again, I just really wanted to get something out for you guys. I felt really bad that we haven't had any content the last 2 weeks. Obviously, we committed to 2 episodes this week with Jeff being out. Obviously, that didn't happen. So again, apologies for that. But hopefully, this will hold you guys over until Jeff gets back next week, and we can get back to our full slate, our full schedule, and we'll both be healthy and ramped up for the remaining 6 weeks and get ready for the playoffs. So appreciate you guys sticking with us. Thank you for listening through my me coughing my brains out. Again, I apologize for that. And as always, send in content, send in any topics that you guys want us to discuss. Obviously, being gone 2 weeks, there's probably a lot of storylines that I didn't discuss. So if, send us a message on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, text us, whatever you want to do. If I can guarantee you that if you message us, we will throw it in the show. So just throw that out there. We have never decided not to bring anything up in the show that somebody recommended to us. So we will make it happen. And hope you guys enjoyed the show, and we will see you next week.
Thanks for listening to What Did They Know podcast. Make sure to follow us on all of our social media outlets to see future episode details, and don't forget to send in any questions or topics that you want to see the guys discuss in their weekly episodes to come.